Well, anyhow, thank you so much for inviting me to talk today. This is going to be a little bit of a whirlwind through the getting up to ambient recording and artificial intelligence, which is just exploding into the ether at the moment in the healthcare system, and how we got there. So hold on to your hats, and I'm happy to talk to folks afterward as well, of course. I have a research group called Open Recordings, where we've been conducting research trying to understand the implications and applications of clinic visit recordings. And none of the work that I present today could be possible without the patient partners, caregiver partners, and members of the research team that I work with, and the clinicians who are involved in our work, and just a spattering of folks up there who are involved. So it really does take a village. It's cliche, but it's very true. This is my funding. And I have no conflicts or disclosures to report. Okay, so let's get the basic definition of what ambient is before we start, because we're going to talk about that today. And it's a technology-supported environment that is sensitive and responsive to the human presence, with the technology part remaining close to invisible as possible to the other people in the room or in the environment. One second. Sorry. Jeez. And in health systems, this is starting to become quite prominent, and it has been for quite a while, actually. Beyond treatment and diagnostic applications, ambient data can be used in a number of increasingly sophisticated ways, as we'll learn. And it really has emerged at pace in the health system. So you can see it in home health, and inpatient hospital care, outpatient clinics. It's really all around us. And so in this talk, I'll talk mostly about ambient recording and its ability to power artificial intelligence in the clinic, in our clinics. So a few years ago, this is Professor Peter Lee, the corporate vice president of Microsoft, and he predicted that all of our visits will be recorded in the next 5 years. I think he's fairly accurate on that, and in fact, our research team had predicted this back in 2018, when we've been looking at the emergence of visit clinic recordings, and that it was beyond a tipping point where it was almost naturally going to evolve. I think the main driver for this, when we've been doing our work, focused on the use of recordings for patients and for care partners to support their care, which I'll present in a bit. That wasn't really what would drive its adoption in the healthcare systems themselves. I think seeing with the emergence of generative AI, the applications and the money to be made for the health system is really what's driven to its adoption right now. So I want to go on a journey of how we got to here with visit recording appearing in our clinic rooms. And so first of all, I'm going to talk about simple recording, so without any of the fancy artificial intelligence features and the sort of history to that. And then I'll move on to the ambient recording. So how did we get here? You may know this person, but the most trusted source of medical information for our older adults, and really for all of us in healthcare, continues to be our clinician, despite the emergence of all these different technologies that are available. In the US, for example, older adults, where I do most of my research, they attend 281 million outpatient healthcare office visits per year. It's approximately 770,000 visits per day. There's a lot of critical information exchanged in those visits. It's the absolute central to a person's healthcare journey are these visits. And what's exchanged and shared and communicated impacts the entire care journey of the patient. So we give them this information in these short visits, and the expectation is that they can manage a lot of this healthcare outside of the setting. Yet, as we know, with this healthcare happening outside of the clinic room, it actually requires a lot of work from the patient and from their care partners. So they have to remember and be able to use a lot of different tools and technologies. And some of the things they have to do at home, they have to fill their medications, they have to self-administer complex medicine regimens, they have to arrange their appointments, they have to pay their bills, they have to inform their family of what happened in the clinic visit, they have to use medical devices, they have to train their loved ones on how to use these medical devices, and they have to monitor their symptoms. They have to report this all back to the clinician, all while trying to manage their actual health condition. So we give them an awful lot of work. It means that what's discussed in that visit in order to enable them to complete this work at home is critical. Yet what we find is that up to 80% of visit information is forgotten when folks leave the medical visit. Now, that's not just older adults, that's kind of across the board. This reduces patient quality of life and health outcomes because they can't sort of manage the care that they're expected to manage at home because it's hard for them to recall what exactly it is they have to do and follow that guidance. And it has a significant impact financially, on avoidable healthcare costs. We find up to $300 billion, that's about 10% of total US healthcare spending, can be attributed to non-adherence to medical advice annually. Poor information also increases burden on care partners who are, again, a very big, important part of our healthcare system. There's up to 50 million care partners in the United States looking after family members or friends. These are informal care partners. And yet 84% report that they need more information to better support their loved ones on their care journey. The current process we have for sharing this visit information, because we know that it's a problem, and we have known for more than a decade, is to share at-the visit summaries with the patients. So these are short summaries, maybe 3 or 4 lines describing what was discussed in the visit, and there's other information in there like the diagnoses, lab and test results, and more recently in the United States, everyone has access to a patient portal through the CARES Act. And so we can access patient portals and see what the clinician wrote during the visit, as well as the visit summary. These are very helpful advances. There's no question about this. However, there are some significant limitations. When people read these notes, they're often short. They have a lot of medical jargon, and so they just kind of say like blah, 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 and it's difficult to follow. So there's not really a lot of engagement within the note itself. And it's not a true comprehensive capture of what was actually discussed during the visit. This is a very brief summary. It also adds burden to our clinicians because they have to write these notes. And as we've heard over the last day or two, there's been advances in AI to try to remove that burden, but there may be some risks to that as well, which I'll talk about today. Another approach to supporting this is to record clinic visits. And this is something that's been known for quite a long time, actually. In the 1970s, Dr. Butt and Dr. Hack both pioneered sort of the use of recording and exploration of using clinic visit recordings to help support the management of care at home after the visit. But this was the technology that they were using at the time. It wouldn't exactly fit in your pocket. Yet, I would argue that everyone in this room today has a high-quality recording device right in their pockets for both video or audio recording. And increasingly, health systems are now offering patients opportunities to record their clinic visits and take those home. This is a patient partner, Sherry Piper. In fact, Sherry and I are going to be speaking at Pocori in 2 weeks, the Patient-Centered Outcome Research Institute. And this is Dr. Jim Ryan, a fellow Irishman. I think all the Irish people like to do this stuff. But he's been recording his patient visits for more than 10 years and sharing them with his patients. He built his own EHR to facilitate this. So we can see that this is happening more and more, but what's the evidence? And I think let's always come back to what's the evidence of benefit? And we're going to talk about this with AI as well. It's one of the big gaps is evaluating where the evidence of benefit lies. So let's talk about the evidence of benefit of sharing visit recordings with patients. There's been several reviews. And what we find with over 30 studies have been conducted, about 25 clinical trials, mostly in oncology, some in pediatric care, is that when folks get access to a recording, they tend to listen. Across these studies, 72% of people reviewed the recording and listened back to it, often many times. It resulted in greater recall and understanding. It also resulted in higher satisfaction. Care partners of the patients reported being better engaged in the care when they would have access to a recording and feeling less anxious. And there were some signals that it could actually improve mental health outcomes for patients having access to these recordings. Clinicians report, and we found in our own research, that they feel a little bit more accountable to the patient and that it actually increases the quality of their communication rather than acting as a barrier toward communication when they're being recorded. And one of the really most interesting reflections in the work that we have done in our group, when we've interviewed patients who get access to recordings, we asked them, like, what's the value in having access to a recording? Why do you want to listen back? And they tell us, well, I want to hear what my doctor said. They're like, yeah, of course, this is what I expect. The next most interesting thing and most important thing for the patient is, I want to hear what I said. Was I a good patient? Did I tell the doctor my symptoms? Do I need to follow up with them? That really surprised me, but I hear it over and over and over again. So just the point being here is that patients are very aware and they really think very strongly about their contributions. This is a relationship. It's not just about what the doctor said. And some other researchers have found that when you share access to recordings, it reduces phone calls to clinics because family members and the patients can listen back to the recording rather than calling, speaking to a nurse who wasn't actually in the visit and not getting the best information exchange. They can go right back to the recording and listen to it. So often comes up as well, is this actually legal? Can patients record visits? And what we found many years ago now is that in the United States, there's no laws around this actually, and what we fall back to are old wiretapping laws. And so in 39 states in the US, they are considered single-party consent states. And so a patient can record a visit without asking for permission. It just has to be the consent of one person. Therefore, they can record if they choose to, and many patients actually do record. In the other states, the other 11, patients you must ask for permission of everyone in the room to get consent to record a visit. But people are still concerned, like, what happens if I get recorded? Will I get sued? Will someone take advantage of this? And this has been studied, not surprisingly. So 2 decades ago, there was some focus group work done with malpractice lawyers where they talked about this hypothetical situation of recording visits. And what the malpractice lawyers came back with was that they felt it was protective for clinicians because they would have an accurate recording of what was actually discussed during the visit. So there's no longer a he, they said sort of conversation going on. They would have the actual recording to go back to. Even when the clinician did do something that was substandard, at least they could resolve it quite quickly and move on. And what we found in the United States is that in Arizona, for example, insurance companies there, if a clinician records a visit, they offer the clinicians a reduction in malpractice premiums and a $1 million increase in coverage for doing so. So they're really putting their money where their mouths are. So I've been involved in a number of different studies with older adults trying to explore the potential value of visit recordings. The thing that we wanted to focus on was pretty much all the prior studies were studies that looked at one single visit recording that was then shared, mainly on oncology. I was interested in the habit of recording that was talked about yesterday. What if we routinely do this? Just make this part of practice over and over. Every visit it's recorded and shared, recorded and shared. And we'll do it with older adults who are often left out of these technology type projects because there's this sort of bias toward them that they can't use technology. I remember some of the first grants we submitted, we would get statements back from our reviewers at the National Institute on Aging. One of them saying, you're expecting older adults to use email and access the internet. That was their critique. I couldn't believe how ageist it was. I'm like, these are people who grew up with the internet and with computers their entire lives. So what are you thinking? So we really wanted to dispel these concerns about older adults being able to interact with this technology. And so in this pilot trial, which we published on last year, was a multi-site trial at Vanderbilt University Medical Center, at University of Texas Medical Branch Galveston, and at Dartmouth College in New Hampshire. And we just want to understand the feasibility of doing a trial like this and the acceptability and usability of visit recordings for patients to see if we could actually demonstrate that we can do this on a smaller scale. We developed a system called HealthPal, the Health Personal Audio Library. It's open source, anyone can have access to it. We developed this through earlier funding that I had gotten from the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation and the National Library of Medicine. And it allows us to record securely visits and then share them back with patients so they can access them or share them with their loved ones. We also have a version, which I'll tell you about, with some generative AI features. But for the trials I'm talking about now, the simple recording, we're just sharing recordings back so they can access them, make notes on the recording if they like, share it with a loved one that they like. And that's the sort of strategy. I'll not go into this theoretical framework that we developed, but essentially what we believe happens is that if a person can access both a written summary and the recording, they can more deeply encode and recall the information through those different means of processing information, which may then result in better self-management. through greater knowledge and greater confidence in being able to manage their healthcare, which will result in better health outcomes. So for this trial, we were aiming for 90 people, we recruited 91. It was funny, we had the final couple that get recruited, they both got a letter to be invited to the project, but it would take us above 91. But they were both so insistent, we were like, well, we should really just recruit both of them and let the IRB know afterwards. Sorry guys, we went one over. So we ended up with 91 folks involved in the project with a nice distribution of demographic characteristics. 85% of patients access their recordings. And you can see here, like the oldest person, do we have the age range? Well, that's the average, but the oldest person on the audio one was 91 years old. So these are folks up to 91 years old accessing independently at home recordings of visits and listening back to them. And we also administered some psychometric surveys to assess feasibility, acceptability, and usability of the intervention, and they all exceeded the standards we were looking for. We recruited 17 clinicians and 16 stayed in the project. One left their clinic, but everyone who we recruited stayed on. And so we were demonstrating feasibility of recruiting clinicians onto these projects. And we retained 89 of 91 patients at 3 months. Honestly, it's incredible. It's a credit to the team that we have working on this project. Our program officer at the NIA said that doesn't seem believable because it was so many people we kept on the project, but it was true. And while we weren't powered, we actually found that there was a difference between the group that received audio recordings and usual care for mental health, and it was actually a clinically important difference in their promised mental health score. So of course, we want to do interviews with our patients and with our clinicians to help understand a little bit more about that experience of accessing recordings, and here are some of the themes that we found, but overall, they were incredibly positive. Clinicians, patients, and care partners, there really weren't very many negative comments about being recorded. But important to start with the negative comments first, what the concerns are, because even if there's not many, it's important you address those concerns as best you can. So they were mainly related to privacy and data storage. And interestingly, we're worried that patients could be impacted by re-listening to traumatic stories was something that one of the clinicians raised. I think it's a really important point that we need to really think about deeply. So in terms of the positive comments, we found that people recommended and were very supportive of visit recording. They found that they would recall and review at their own pace at home. They considered it to be a very comprehensive a capture of what actually happened, like as a true capture of the entire visit, whereas the after-visit summary was often too short. Now you can see one of the comments here. Now they give you the after-visit report, but it's like watching a television program with half of it missing. Like that's so true. People reported a positive experience with recording with no perceived detrimental impact on the visit interaction. And we were concerned that maybe doctors would be a little bit more closed or patients would be a little bit more closed, but that's not what we found in either the clinician interviews or the patient interviews. Let's go ahead. It's with our normal visit, was what the patient was saying when they were being recorded. Clinicians found recordings the process was easy to integrate in their clinical workflows. Now, a caveat here is that our team was doing the recording, so that was to be expected. And care partners felt more engaged and had more insights in their patients' care. I love this quote. It was from a young woman we interviewed, and it actually made her have some insights into her own health and like thinking about her own health care when she would review this recording. Some of the other things we find are that when care partners listen back, they'll say things like, "I didn't know they had it so bad. They kind of hide this from me a little bit." Or they didn't say this to the doctor. I want to make sure they find this out. And that's actually a common theme. I think one of the fallacies that we've kind of accepted in healthcare is that we just need to give patients this sort of short medical information about what they have to do, and that's our job done. I really don't think that's adequate at all. When people get recordings, there's so much more in the recording. There's the tone, the tenor, the sentiment, the pacing, the options forgone, the discussion, the laughs. There's just this one, you can read these different quotes, but one of them that always stands out to me. We interviewed a patient during a case study that we conducted. This is actually separate from this trial that I described, in Galveston. And so it's a cancer clinic where they record visits and share them with their patients. They all get a clinic recording device when they come to the clinic. This person had stage 4 pancreatic cancer, so we didn't think we should interview them, but they were insistent. So I really want to be interviewed because I want to talk about my experience. And we said, okay. And so my research assistant, Michelle Dannenberg, did the interview, and she came out an hour later, just couldn't stop sobbing. It's like, you need to go and take the day off. And then we reviewed the interview, really understood why. The person would talk about having access to this recording as their right-hand person. And, they would revisit the laughs they had with their clinician when they were feeling down, and it would make them laugh and give them a little bit of joy. And when their family would ask them about their visit and how it went, they didn't want to repeat the fact that they're dying. It's really hard to talk about that every time. So they would give them the recording and say, you can listen back if you like. Now, that's a more extreme example, but I think it just, again, highlights the potential here of these recordings to really help support care. I also love this other quote. Sorry, I should stop talking about the quotes, but it's like, I've met these people and talked with them. They really mean a lot. I interviewed the folks at the top here, and this was in, where was it? Gosh, Michigan, Ludington, Michigan. It was Jim's practice, actually. And so this woman, she had visual impairment, her husband had cognitive impairment, but they worked together for their visits. And so they would go to every visit together, and Jim would give them a recording of the visit. And they talked about how they would listen with a glass of wine at night back to the visits, and together they would form a full brain. Isn't that incredible? Now, what really upset me was when I asked, well, do you record anywhere else? They said, well, we asked the eye surgeon, the specialist I go to see, whether we could record the visit, and they said, absolutely not. What does the eye surgeon think the patient's going to do with this recording that's so concerning to them? I have no idea. And then in another project, again, I'm jumping a little bit on this pilot projects we published last year for people living with ALS. We video recorded their multidisciplinary clinic visits. These are visits that are incredibly long, 3 to 5 hours with multiple specialists. The care partners in those visits, they reported that many of our patients passed away during the project. ALS is a terrible condition, it's fatal. The care partners kept watching the videos after the person passed away. They used it as a form of bereavement management, and again, it's something else we're quite interested in exploring. Okay, so all these different pilot projects, and I talked a little bit about the audio trial, but there's many others I've kind of spotted around in. They led to the basis of these larger trials that we're currently doing, and I'm just going to mention them briefly, and I'm happy to follow up with folks afterward. So, quickly, we have a project with the National Institute on Aging, and it's with the same sites, Vanderbilt, UTMB, Galveston, and Dartmouth, where it's called Replay. And we're recording the visits of 336 older adults randomized to usual care, just no change whatsoever, or getting access to recordings for 12 months. So we'll record every scheduled visit they have. And we're almost completed in recruitment for this project. It's been going very well. And it's both Spanish language and English speaking patients. So we're going to have over 700 recordings probably by the end of this project. So the next thing here is that we can look longitudinally at the impact of sharing recordings. We have a similar project called Chronicle, funded by Baccori. And in this project, it's a comparative effectiveness study looking at training patients and how to use their patient portal. Because why add something more to the health system that doesn't add value? We're going to come back to that with AI. So we want to see, well, can we just train folks to use their patient portals better? Would that be sufficient? Or does the recordings really add some extra value? And so that's what this comparative effectiveness project is with, and we're recruiting 900 older adults across the country for that project with the sites I mentioned earlier. And by the end, that's following them for 6 months. The outcome here is quality of life using Promise. The other one was self-management for the Replay project. And for this project, we're almost halfway through recruitment, again, going very well. And just this past month, we were funded from Baccori for another project where we are looking at sort of a larger version of our ALS project, where we're video recording clinic visits, the multidisciplinary clinic visits for people living with ALS. And that's a 10-site trial across the country where we'll recruit 400 people living with ALS and their care partners, and we'll capture those multidisciplinary clinic visits. And again, they meet with up to 12 clinicians over 3 to 5 hours, and care as usual was giving them 2 or 3 lines from each of those specialists at those visits, and then 3 months go by. And they're expected to do these very complex medical procedures at home. So we're exploring whether video recording could add more value for them. You want to take a stretch? We're going to get into the ambient part now of the session. But with exponential advances in artificial intelligence, natural language processing, machine learning, and the emergence of large language models, you think of GPT and Claude and Llama, they're overcoming traditional barriers to systematic, scalable, and real-time processing of unstructured data like clinical conversations that we've been using for a long time now. So today we find ourselves poised to apply this technology to visit recordings for many conceptually beneficial purposes. We're going to talk about some of those. Oh yeah, but I actually want to acknowledge, so before I move forward, I'm not a data scientist. I work with wonderful data scientists. I just have ideas and we talk on how to advance those. This stuff isn't new. It's been around, and it's been around for a long time, and it's building on the shoulders and the hard work of many incredible scientists in years gone by. So, I think people think it just came out of nowhere. It's not. It's been around for a long time. And this slide's probably out of date, by the way, because it's moving at such a fast pace. We just can't keep up with the developments. But before I go further, I just want to ask a question. How do you confuse artificial intelligence? Any ideas? You ask it to differentiate between a blueberry muffin and a chihuahua. So, I've been running this one for a while. It's still my favorite. However, I was quite curious. Does it actually do better now with these large language models? So I give it the image. I'm like, hey, can you tell me which image is a dog and which is a chihuahua and which is a muffin? And GPT was able to give me the correct rows and columns, which was which. And so I was like, that's great. And it's like, do you want to produce an image? I'm like, sure, show me the image. I'd love to see it labeled and let me know. This was the labeling of which is a chihuahua and which is a muffin. And as you can see, it wasn't quite as accurate in labeling what was the chihuahua. So I said, no, you've got this wrong. Can you maybe do it again? And so, of course, I did it right. No, I didn't do it right. It still got it wrong. So we've got chihuahuas and muffins labeled. So it seems to be still quite confused. I was confused why it was confused, because it told me the right answer and then it couldn't correctly label the image. I'm like, what is going on with this bloody thing? So I asked again. I'm really being insistent. I'm a very insistent person. I asked my wife. And I was like, please tell me again. And I broke GPT. It just said, no, server error. We can't do this. So I got a network error. I took a deep breath. I let it reload. And after rebooting all the GPUs it has and all the electricity from a small town to run this request, it realized the error of its ways. And I was really pleased that it explained to me why it was getting it wrong. And so, what I asked, would you like an annotated version of the original uploaded meme with the correct muffin positions marked? I said, absolutely, it'd be great. It'll be 100% accurate. So there's definitely a lot of potential, but even for some simple tasks. So I think it's a joke, but the overconfidence many people have in these technologies and the hype around them, they are incredible. I'm a big advocate for them, but we really need to slow down for a second before we cause harm. So the patient voice is what will power artificial intelligence in healthcare in the future. I'm convinced of that. I think that is exactly what we will be using. It'll be the most intricate part of it. So let's explore how. Well, it'll reduce documentation burden and reduce the burden on clinicians. And we already see this now that, 53% of clinicians have reported burnout, 23% said they were depressed. These are much higher numbers than we see in the general population. So clinicians also have much higher rates of suicide than we see in the general population, so this is an absolute real concern. And a key driver to burnout is documentation burden. It's that additional hour can result in a 2% increase in risk for burnout. So we really want to address that. And the ambient technologies that have emerged over the last few years, they were demonstration projects last year. They're now being adopted at scale across the country, where visits are being recorded and they're generating the EHR note, the health record note, automatically, and billing codes and lay summaries for patients. They can produce it all from the conversation. So that is an incredible advancement that will hopefully cause some good. There are some risks that we'll talk about. I'm leaving the rest to the end, so I'll stop saying that. It will also assist with real-time diagnosis and treatment recommendations. And this has been going on for a number of years. It's only getting better. So already we know that we can use voice recordings to assist in identifying and diagnosing chronic respiratory diseases, asthma, flu, psychiatric conditions such as bipolar disorder, depression, developmental disorders such as autism spectrum disorder, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease. So we can use these technologies with the voice of the patient to identify these diagnoses relatively well now. So, and I've already said that with depression, sorry. And while it's in its infancy, the real-time integration of in-clinic shared decision-making tools is an area that we're quite interested in. There's been many papers have started to emerge over the last few years. It's actually hard to keep up in this area. I was at a conference before I came here, the International Conference of Communication and Healthcare, and there was a session on AI that we were a part of. It's the only time at a conference I've ever found a parallel session where they had to turn away people. The people were sitting on the floor. There's so much interest in this. It's such an interesting area that it's just going to continue expanding so quickly. We can use the power of the patient's voice with artificial intelligence to help make sense of complex health information. And that's kind of where I had started out, where, we want to meaningfully engage patients and their loved ones through the use of easy to understand, curated medical information. And the idea that we had was to develop the system HealthPal that I showed you earlier. This is the kind of all bells and whistles version where we can curate a visit recording automatically and find the key information that patients say is of value to them from their visit. So where medicines were discussed, where diagnoses were discussed, where test and imaging results were discussed during the visit. And they can revisit then the recording of the visit, and they can filter down to look for those specific mentions. Say it's a new medication, or a new condition, arthritis. I don't know what that is. So you can select arthritis, find where it was discussed, and there's a pop-up which explains in lay language what this is. So we're currently adding more features to this. What's important is that our development of features is completely based on interviews and prior data with patients and their care partners. We could do infinite things, but that's not what we need. We need things that people find of value. In another project, we have an R1 project from the NIA called Voices, where we're studying interpersonal communication for people living with dementia, their loved ones who come to the visits, and their clinicians. And so we're recruiting 200 dyads across New York University, Langone, and federally qualified health centers. About 60% of the patients there are Spanish language speaking. And then we'll recruit another 100 at Dartmouth Health, rural communities. And following them for a year, recording all of their visits. But we're doing this detailed analysis of those interpersonal communications during the visits. What we want to do is understand, are there mechanisms of communication that influence health outcomes? Again, I keep emphasizing this, using some actual evaluation and analysis to inform decisions about features we would like to add. So based on that analysis, we want to then update our HealthPal system to develop features which target those mechanisms of actions that seem to have influence. And I loved seeing the COM-B model yesterday, that behavioral model. We used the same model in interviews with patients and informing the design of this project. One other project is called Audio Care. And so I've been personally interested in the use of recordings and ambient AI technologies in the space of psychotherapy. So this was proposed again. These are none of our ideas are ever original. Maybe one or two are, but often folks have thought about these things before. And so Munchadal proposed using recordings. They reported that they found they would strengthen recall motivation for desire for change for people receiving psychotherapy, reduce cognitive distortion, deepen encoding and understanding of their session, and place the client back in the therapeutic context outside of the session. If you think about psychotherapy compared to regular medical practice, in regular medical practice, we discuss the medical condition and then we make recommendations. In psychotherapy, the words are the medication, yet we leave people to go a week or two without any access to their medication. Can you believe that? So we want to explore, can we actually share recordings of psychotherapy sessions And one of the additional questions is, will people do this? But more importantly, what are the active ingredients of psychotherapy that actually are of value to patients? And so we recruited 15 patients, people with substance use disorder and co-occurring disease who were receiving psychotherapy in the community. We recorded 2 of their sessions, once sequentially, and then we had them review their recordings after, and we asked, what is it in this visit that is actually helpful for you in your therapy? What makes an impact to you? Then we had the therapist do the same thing independently, and we compared them to see if the therapist and the patient are both finding the same things of value or not. And we've done this in primary care and other specialty settings too. In psychotherapy, we find that there's some nice overlap for sure. We're still analyzing data. So validation and insight are very important. But one big difference, patients highlight the third most important category is social talk. The small talk and the windows into their lives that they share. That was the bottom of the list for the therapist. They rarely, if ever, highlighted that information. And we have asked patients, like, why is that of value? And they talk about, this is me extending myself to the therapist. I'm offering an insight to my life. And I don't know if our therapists recognize that because they're so honed in and trying to get to the, like, how can I get this little insight to help with the treatment? So that's another application. And then stepping back to the health system level, there's applications for our health systems, of course, and we've heard several of those. Dr. Tyseal yesterday was presenting on this work, and this is, an absolute forerunner in the field. If you can read her papers, you really should. I know I do, and I share them with my students. So automating, for example, the evaluation of communication quality or emotion or other characteristics of the visit to feed back into the health system is another way of trying to automate evaluation of quality. We want to do this and ensure we're in high quality communication. These technologies now allow us the opportunity to do so. One of my colleagues, Professor Bob Gramling at UVM, they have the conversation lab and they study the epidemiological understanding of conversational diversity. That's a bit of a mouthful, but they have open access tools, natural language processing, machine learning to analyze complex clinical conversations in real time, including the conversational story arcs, information flow, the importance of pauses. I spent a half a day with his team where they just talked about pauses. And the research team consisted of a classically trained musician, a social worker, some medical students, and ecological environmental data scientists. It is so interdisciplinary, it was mind-blowing, but it was so interesting, and they do such good work. So this will obviously result in scalable real-time evaluations. In the United States, we use the Consumer Assessment Health surveys to evaluate the clinician's performance in terms of quality of communication and the patient experience. And that impacts clinicians' income, like how well they're doing this. However, the response rates are typically under 30% and falling. There's no doubt that ambient recording and automated analysis will replace that. There is a question, should it? So let's move into some ethical considerations. We have an obligation, ethical obligation to our patients, to our clinicians, and to the public to consider both the opportunities and the risks of adopting these technologies. I think the risks are often left out, and it shouldn't be taken lightly. An ethical principle is a statement of a duty or a responsibility in the context of development, deployment, and continuing assessment of AI technologies for health. This is from a WHO report on these new technologies, which I really would encourage you all to read. So Bob Surj Khashoggi, a colleague of mine, a computer scientist who's an expert in Gen AI technologies at Dartmouth, and myself, we wrote this paper preparing for the widespread adoption of clinic visit recordings. And we're scientists engaged in the study of clinic conversations. We've been doing it for more than a decade. And we're very enthusiastic about the potential routine clinic recordings and the AI applications that can empower and improve the quality of healthcare communication and delivery. And realizing those benefits of routine visit recording requires the prevention and amelioration of unintended and very foreseeable harms. So I want to talk about some of the harms that will almost certainly come to pass that we need to prepare for, to try to work sort of against. So the first big harm that will likely come up is burden. I love this. I've had this for many years in slides, but it just really reflects this wonderful statement of just how much work it takes to be a clinician, how it impacts their families. They are humans too. And so efficiencies gained from natural language processing do not equal productivity. People are doing this work in their own homes at night, so it doesn't actually reflect any productivity for the health system. So we must be careful not to take efficiencies from reduced administrative tasks, such as documentation burden, and simply add more work to clinicians. This is a crude approach that will not reduce the burnout problem. If we just start adding more and more patients to see the clinicians because they have more time, because they're not doing any administrative work, that doesn't help the clinician or the patient. So it threatens the opportunities to enhance communication quality. There's also a threat of automation bias and nonsensical applications of thoughtless interpretation of AI that can arise under conditions of distraction and time pressure. So if you're rushed, you'll just accept what's there and move along quickly. And what was concerning was just last week I was in a meeting, and this is what one of my colleagues told me, that the clinicians where they've adopted ambient technologies are now being asked to see up to 4 more patients per day. So, I mean, predictable and starting to happen. And that's at a very large health system. And we can't just use these technologies to hand off more work to patients. That's also a large concern. No, we really should use this as an opportunity to improve person-centered care, not overwhelm patients. And that's especially the case for older adults, where unintended consequences could have, it could result in, for example, in my work, where you have a recording, maybe the care partner is less likely to meet the patient to go to a visit because of that, and we may inadvertently increase levels of isolation. And we're very worried about that. We have to assess that and measure that as well. So, as mentioned, hallucination. While it can reduce burden, generative AI hallucinates. And what that means is it sometimes, and more than sometimes, makes up answers that are very convincing but very wrong. This can also happen over time. So we have a thing called AI drift. So maybe you've got a system or a model that's working quite well initially, and it starts to drift over time and starts performing quite badly. So if you're not monitoring that, you will fail and miss that. It can also do things such as inaccurately summarize the clinic visit conversation from these notes, so it's not a reflection of what was actually discussed. And I mentioned just the slide earlier. This can result in this automation bias where the clinicians accepting the guidance from the system without question. This will almost certainly happen. If you're seeing another 4 patients per day, do you really have time to go back and check everything? We're only human. I don't think we will. Explainable AI frameworks can improve algorithm transparency, and they can offer visual explanations, pinpointing the characteristics of the data that was most of influence on the algorithm-specific diagnoses or predictions or contributions. So again, I'm not a data scientist. Our data science colleagues could speak more to this, but these explainable AI frameworks, they essentially open up the box so you can understand where the data came from. Still be careful. In hallucinations, the large language models, for instance, can produce citations which look very realistic, which are completely fake and made up to support their own conclusions. That happens. It's been documented. There's issues of fairness, another big area. So we have burden, and we've also got fairness. There's a potential to exacerbate disparities in care, especially as paralinguistic features of speech and their meaning work very widely across culture. So, when I moved to America, I don't know if anyone's noticed, I'm not American. I'm Canadian. I'm from Belfast. And in Belfast, when we speak, we raise our voice at the end of each sentence. And so in the US, when I would speak, people would think I was always asking a question. And so I would be saying something, someone's like, are you asking me or are you telling me? They get very confused. So you can imagine what havoc it could play in the system where it's like, Paul asked 500 questions today. I'm like, no, I was just speaking to someone. But no, these are real issues, and it's crucial that we address these algorithmic biases that frequently and disproportionately affect underrepresented groups of people due to homogeneous, imbalanced, incomplete, or inaccurate, or differentially inaccurate training data used to create these systems. And these result in systematic biases that too cause harm for minoritized patients. We can try to address these by improving the fairness of ambient AI. We can improve fairness by paying scientific attention and safeguarding protected health information specific to audio recording and clinic encounters, allowing opportunities for data sharing through open source scientific communities of learning. It may include creating decentralized data repositories. I know in our research we have consent from all of our patients to share the recordings at the end of the projects in secure means to open up this data to others so they can be creative with it. And there's different mechanisms for making this data more secure, such as decentralized data repositories, federated learning, and approaches. There's a really nice link there for folks who want to learn more about federated learning and what that actually means. I'd really encourage you to take a look. Essentially, it means you can do the research without having to give the person your data. So you can keep your data locally and secure, but you can still use your data at all these different sites to explore new algorithms or applications. I'm also quite worried about commoditization of this data. And so, when clinical data is required to train algorithms that in turn are used in healthcare, these mutually dependent conditions present potentially dynamic fiscal relationships characterized by AI makers placing monetary value on clinical training data and health systems placing monetary value on trained algorithms. And if we have both of these things, the entities can be driven by profit and ownership of intellectual property. And this will quickly create circumstances where visit recordings become commodities, fueling the development of proprietary AI and closing down opportunities to access these tools. And again, some of these things are emerging. One early application of AI in clinical encounters is to generate office notes, as we've talked about, in clinic billing. But we can see that, in some of these places, the system may sort of replace the clinician's judgment about reasonable representation of their work and what they would typically bill or code with an unintended sort of prioritization for high-yield billing information and codes, resulting in higher cost of care. And you can imagine for an uninsured patient what that's going to mean, just much higher bills. But for our health system as a whole, it will increase the cost artificially of healthcare. You can see here the sample. You probably have read it by now, but coding software that make patients appear sicker than they actually are. Anxiety conflated with depression. They increase payments by $3,300 per year per patient. That's a lot of money. More recently, there's health insurance companies where they've been using AI to quickly reject claims from patients in the United States. 1.2 seconds per claim reviewed. 1.2 seconds to review a claim and reject. On a later investigation, they found 90% error rates. The thing is, patients don't actually push back against the rejection, so the majority of them just lose out. That's what really happens. We also have to consider posthumous data use. So when we have these recordings, when people die, what do? There's conversations there about other people, not just the patient, revelations that could be harmful. And so we have to manage and think about strategies to protect against that. And coming back to the sort of the real-time evaluation, one of the concerns I have is that when we move to this, we'll probably just stop asking patient surveys. And maybe that reduces burden on patients, sure, but it also reduces an opportunity for them to have their voice in the healthcare system. So I think that's some heavy stuff. We can go back to looking at the Chihuahua again. So I'm getting toward the last few slides here. Thinking about preparing for a future with AI-powered ambient recording and how we can do this in a more careful, thoughtful manner. There's a concept called human warranty that it really sticks with me. The evaluation by patients and clinicians in the development and deployment of AI technologies at every single stage. As well as shared accountability, there must be meaningful engagement with patients, providers, payers, and technologists. We really must avoid ethics washing, where there's self-monitored regulation with no true oversight. It's just tokenistic. Community engagement studios and UX design are very critical to the design of these systems. And these strategies, and we use them in all of our work, they can really help engage the end user in the design and thought of these systems. And there's guides that exist for how we engage people. So like Carmen et al. Had this model from, I think, 2010 or 2013. It's a beautiful model for thinking about how to engage people at every level of the health system. We must be guided by theory when thinking about our implementation of these tools. We can't just put in things because we can put in things. And different models such as CFR, I think, are very helpful when thinking about this. And we must mitigate against limitations that plague current AI applications, especially for older adults. There was an article by Shwani et al. Where they found that they did an evaluation of AI tools currently used with older adults. Many were low quality, they had lack of adequate testing, they had poor generalizability, and they found that about 80% had no true marginal or even clinical benefit for the patient. Yet these are tools that people want to adopt. I really like some of these resources. There's the 20 critical questions on transparency, replicability, God, I can't say that, ethics and effectiveness. That is a lovely article you can read later. And then I've been part of a group at the Division of Clinical Informatics at Harvard where we've been thinking about sort of governance. And this is really essential in this fast-moving area, but it's very challenging. You have to balance speed of adaptation with safety. And there are many risks, too many to discuss, but you have to remember every time we open a new application in the health system, we open up a new security door that can be accessed by the various actors who are looking to access these doors. They have no question they are. So you need to really ask, is the risk worth the benefit? And it also results in these complex liability issues. If we cause harm, who's at fault? A GPT? Do we sue GPT? How do you sue GPT? It's not designed for medical use. It's a large language model, but we're using it in those ways. I don't just have this because I'm here with Victor. I recommend this to everyone. I teach a class with this where Victor will come and speak to the students. But I really want, and I emphasize in many of these talks I give, the importance of the patient is the reason for our healthcare. We can't forget that. We just can't. So I think some things we can try to do are to train our clinicians and patients to know in the basics of machine learning and patient-centered communication, to try to help sort of stave off this myth of AI and some of the fear folks have with it so they can understand better the risks and opportunities. And so my final slide is, going back to this WHO article, they had these 6 principles to follow, and I think they're really nice principles. Protecting human autonomy, promoting human well-being, safety, and public interest, ensuring transparency, explainability, intelligibility, fostering responsibility and accountability, ensuring inclusiveness and equity, and promoting AI that is responsive and sustainable. These are good principles for us to at least start to follow as we design and move into this world. That was a lot. Thank you.